Okay, thank you so much for joining us for the March 21st meeting of the Blue Ribbon Committee. We will start with a roll call. I am Assistant Mayor Kelly. Councilor Tabor.
Yep, present.
Megan Corsetti. Present. John O'Leary.
Here.
We have Karen Kennard for city staff, Howard Snyder for city staff, Peter Stipp, sorry, for staff, Peter Britz for staff, Eric Anderson.
Here.
Tracy Kozak. Hello. Mary, I believe, is on their way. Byron.
Here.
David.
Here.
Beth. Here. Our city councilor. And Jen. Hi. Hi, Jen is here. Perfect. Yes.
Thank you. It's a housekeeping issue.
Yes.
I don't know how this committee is gonna function, but just for the sake of question, what rules of order are we operating?
I believe traditionally in the city, we operate under Robert's rules, so I would say that if the committee is comfortable with operating under Robert's rules, then you can go forward with Robert's.
And that's. Appreciate
You're the parliamentarian.
Like the co-chairs will be.
By default, we'll do our best.
Okay, perfect. And was everyone able to go over the meeting minutes? John, do you-
Two points if I could, please.
Yeah.
First of all, the minutes do not reflect the presentation that we had from the city attorney.
Okay,
And I think that's important to have in there.
it's a
because,
great point.
Yes, it was an important presentation and set the tone for appropriate meeting date for us. So that's my first point. So I believe we need to improve that. And secondly, let's see if I can see it. One thing under number 3,
Mhm.
there was discussion about items to consider the inclusion in the
Work plan.
committee. What's that?
Yep,
Including recognizing the development of Sherburne School property as a priority site for new housing with an affordability component. I think that, I'd like to get some consensus with regards to what component means. Component in my mind, means a part. So for instance, let's just say, I'll pick a number, say that we had 40 units out there. Does that mean that, say, 4 of the units are workforce housing, that's a component of it? Or is it, because my understanding, and maybe this is a work in progress, is that whatever was going to be done would be workforce housing. So as opposed to a component being workforce housing. So if I can get some clarification on that, I'd appreciate it.
Would preferable language be for workforce housing?
I think that, that's fine with me. I just want to make sure it's not my decision to make, but I just want to get a consensus of the group with regards to what the intent is. And if what you're saying is for workforce housing, I'm certainly comfortable with that.
Does anybody else have any problem with that? Does that seem like improvement?
I guess I'm trying to replay the meeting in my brain now. Were we very specific in saying that is definitely going to be workforce housing? Because I know at one point we went for looking at housing units, and initially the data was saying rental units, and then we decided to scratch out rental to include any type of affordable situation.
Megan, I think John is referring to the language in the minutes about Sherburne.
Correct.
Right,
Yeah. So I think what we could, I read it as part of the conversation when we were talking with the new housing units was, the affordability component of it, not an affordability component. I guess I'm not sure if I'm being clear that.
No, you are being clear.
Yeah, affordability is going to be in the school, in the scale of it, but we were talking about that, about this component of that site. Does that make sense of how I read it as, and the
Yeah.
whole thing was gonna
And
be,
again,
yeah,
that's certainly,
so
the
would,
way you read it is the way you
Yeah.
read it to you, and that's certainly, but what I'm trying to do is to see if there's wording out there that means the same thing to all of us, that's all.
And I I think we're simply voting on the meeting minutes, so
Minutes, yeah.
perhaps someone can review the recording, and use the word that was said in the meeting, and then maybe for this conversation, we add it as a new business item to the agenda.
Yeah, so what we can do is we can table the vote for
That's
these
fine.
minutes, we can
Yeah.
review the tape, adjust them, and then bring those minutes back for the next meeting.
Perfect.
Does that work for the committee?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Okay, and then I just want to real quickly, because we really are trying to run these meetings pretty tight. And we have a couple members of this committee and staff that sit on different committees that also meet this evening, including planning board and sustainability. What I want to do real quickly is if you're a member of the audience and you plan on speaking during public comment, can you please raise your hand? We're not going to be doing a sign up, but I want to make sure that we have time for everyone. And right now, we only have a slate of 15 minutes. So if we have what feels like a lot of people in the room who want to speak, what we will do is shorten a couple other agenda items to make room. So if you think you are going to want to speak for public comment, please raise your hand. So if we have more than 5 or 6 people, we'll change our time. But if we only have, I only see about 4 hands, 5, 6. Okay, so what we will do is our next agenda item is discussion of committee work. What we'll do is chop that down for around 20 minutes, 25 minutes, so that we can add another 5 minutes to public comment, so we can make sure that nobody feels rushed. Okay, does that work for the committee? Perfect, thank you so much. Okay, John, do you want to start?
See this one up? We left off at the last meeting. Having walked through the problem that the city has of not creating housing that's affordable to our median income of around 100,000. Let's call it the missing middle. And that our mission is to do all we can in the next 2 years to create more supply of that kind of housing. In fact, I'll read the mission from January 16th that the council gave us. The mission of the Blue Ribbon Committee on Housing is to review and recommend to the city council ways in which the city can create more affordable housing opportunities. In putting together the last meeting, we looked at what do we think we can realistically accomplish, and in terms of the number of housing units for that missing middle that are in the pipeline. That means permitted, it doesn't mean built necessarily. Means permitted and could be built as late as the 3rd year, but it's in the process. And you know, our baseline right now is between 20 and 50 units a year of this kind of housing. So I think if we give ourselves a quantitative goal, we won't get so consumed in process that we'll stay at between 27 and 50 a year. Hopefully, we'll push ourselves, engage ourselves to find creative ways to add to that number. We did on the slide show you our housing navigator thought 200 was a realistic goal. He's looking at what we can do with zoning, what we can do with affordable housing built on city land. And that may be too conservative. But that was his advice for a starting point. That's both rental and for sale. Able to be purchased by people making median income, and that's our scarcity. So Tracy challenged us, saying that's too low. I think I'll start off the discussion with Beth, because Beth has a window into everything that happens in the planning.
I would be comfortable going up to 500, but maybe not quite as high as Tracy is, if we want truly a goal that we feel is attainable.
We just open it up for general discussion.
Beth, what does that look like? How do you get to 500? It's not one 500 project.
No, this would be at least 3 or 4.
So is it like 3 PHA projects?
maybe there's somebody else out there that wants to, like, we have a lot of littler projects that are giving us some workforce housing, like the Cinemagic that's getting built and some others that are just in those sort of planning phases. So I feel like when you add all of those up, that we might be able to get to that number, at least darn close to it.
Can I tag along on another question? Is that like 500 in 1 year, or is that 500 year over a year?
That, I was thinking 2 years.
That's 500 units at the end of a 2-year term that are permitted.
Okay.
Not necessarily,
Yeah.
Not in construction.
In construction
Just
or-
Permanent.
Okay.
If we can do that in 2 years.
Yeah, my question, it sounds like this is, the number 500 is coming from sort of what you're seeing coming through the system and what you think that can be based on those numbers, and not working back from some larger goal around like needs-based, like we need this many units. at the
Oh, we
beginning.
need more than
Yeah.
that. I'm trying to look at it logically as to what might actually
What's
be
actually
possible.
okay.
Is that number just? Is that number to be considered aggressive? Is that number to be?
Do we know, so what did the Rockingham County needs-based study, do you remember what the
Off the top of my head.
I wrote this down. I think Craig Welch was recently quoted in the paper as saying we need 1,500 affordable units in the next 10 years.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
that
that,
sounds
that,
about
and
right.
that's based on the Rockingham County.
No, that's, based off of their needs study.
Okay.
Cause the Portsmouth Housing Authority did a Portsmouth study, Rockingham did the whole area, all the communities, yeah.
So if we could do 500 in 2 years, that put us on pace for 1,500 in 6 years.
Oh,
Which is-
yeah, that does.
So that would be relatively aggressive considering the amount of.
It would be on par with the need, is what we're, I guess is what
The
the
amount
study
of,
shows.
at least, recognized property that would accommodate that type of aggressive building.
Not all of it's city owned, so we would have to encourage private development in this direction as well.
And I think one of the things I can, that, you know, I know we shouldn't be taking this into consideration, but I'm going to anyways, because the question's gonna get asked. You know, as far as using the criteria of quote unquote affordable. Where do we stand in the city of Portsmouth vis-a-vis the local seacoast community? I mean, back when I was looking at this stuff years and years ago, I mean, Portsmouth provided 90% of the affordable housing in the seacoast area. I mean, and, you know, are we still somewheres in that ballpark?
We do still provide our required amount, probably plus some.
Yeah.
It's hard to get all of the communities to buy on, but when I'm talking about affordability, I'm talking even in talking to business owners, which I've been trying to do a lot of, trying to get them to invest in their own housing that they would then rent to their own employees for 30% of their income, right? You know, I'm talking about affordability, however we can get
Yeah,
there.
and that was interesting when Ben mentioned it last week. I don't know, you know, I mean, there was an employer off of Lafayette Road that when the condos at Lafayette Road went up for sale, he bought a number of them. And his employees lived there. You know, so, you know, he recognized that the value of his employees, and frankly, to be honest, you know, he was in a position to be able to make that type of an investment. You know, I don't mean to think that everybody can.
Right.
But the other thing, and I know I'm gonna be jumping around a little bit, but, you know, and I was reflecting on some of the comments that were made during the public comment session. You know, and Ben talked about employers, if I got it straight, you know, employers being in a situation where they could make housing available for their employees. You know, are there other communities that have that type of zoning in place? And if they do, is that something we could look at? You know, I mean, people come in and say, well, this is a problem. And I know in a perfect world, someone who comes in and points out a problem also has a solution. But, you know, what I'm saying, and I'm sorry, let me just finish up and then, you know, is there a template that we can use, or at least look at using to make that accommodation? Go ahead, Beth, I mean,
Yeah.
No, I just want to give you the
John,
example
you
of
got a
Dover.
good bite of the apple on that.
Yeah, so Dover has, TDRs, what does this stand for?
Transfer of development rights.
Thank you, transfer development rights that actually a business owner used to build housing in Dover doing, right? So that is something we can look at, and I'm more than happy to invite those people in to come and tell you about their project and how they did it. They've spoken actually at the Rockingham Planning Commission and several places that I've invited them to speak, so we can definitely go down that road as well.
thank you.
I'd like to call on Tracy just because you had strong feelings about that.
Well, I have two questions.
Yeah.
Just clarification. So I heard it said the city council's mission was for us to create affordable housing. And then I've heard that our goal is to create missing middle housing, which from my understanding are two totally different things. So the middle income housing is middle income housing, and affordable housing for the state definition is lower income housing. So are we doing both or one or the other?
Well, I would answer that middle income, you know, 105,000 a year median income is, we're priced up so high now that in effect,
They feel
the
one and
average
the
person,
same.
the average person is in the affordable cat. Now,
Definition of antiquated.
yeah, the state definition, I understand. And I think what lands best for many of us is the workforce housing definition, which is 100% of median income can afford 30% for housing to buy, 60% of median income for rent.
I think it's really important we all understand the definitions and before we set goals, because this always trips up the conversation. People have different understandings of different words and
Yes.
people can be talking about totally different things in the same conversation. So I just want to make sure we have clarity.
I completely agree with you. I think affordability, especially in this city, is very subjective. And so I think it's very important that when we say affordability, we mean the defined standard, not our own personal preference of, well, nobody could afford $1,800 a month. Nobody can afford, I think we have to make sure that we stay within what the definitions of affordability are and stay away from sometimes swaying the conversation based on our own opinions. Yes.
Well, and while we all focused on workforce, I think it's important to focus on the progression too, because if we're only providing housing for the workforce, they cannot age into being residents of Portsmouth. If they don't have the ability to move from a rental to a starter home, then it's kind of like John has called it, the missing middle is gonna continue to be there.
Yeah.
So I think it's imperative that we define what we're talking about.
I appreciate that point, just, I think it's really important if we're looking at a sustainable approach to this, that we need to find ways to make the housing life cycle work again, and it's not working right now.
And I would just add on to that, I want to sort of put that into more literal terms in my mind, which is sort of, trying to address the specific, definitions around affordable housing, workforce housing through incentives to developers or PHA. That's to me, like the short term, like specific focused impact on that regard. As far as the missing middle, that's more the sustainable like system in place. Like how do we make sure that those next starter homes or next starter units, wherever what those things might be, are actually within reach for folks. And I think that's different than the short term targeted PHA incentive based programs.
Yeah.
So we've got a proposed 500 as a goal, which we admit is aggressive. We've talked about the definitions of what those 500 units are. We've talked about a goal that reflects need. We can't snap our fingers and create 1,500, but we're clearly stretching to do something that remedies the need as much as we can. Does anybody feel strongly that we're being way too aggressive, way out over our skis?
Well, again, I don't have this stuff, I'm sorry.
Jen?
There's a part of me that's like, yes, we gotta do as much as we can. I push back on how we get there because it feels very unrealistic to me in that respect. And when I sat here last time and Joe gave us our homework, I wrote down hundred and forty. Because in my mind, that's one PHA project and like 4, maybe market rate housing developments that have 10 units each of affordability because they wanted some incentive that we could give them through zoning. Then Tracy presented the project with like 70 units, like what the next day. And so that, I mean, maybe that changes my mind, right? But I don't know how many Mark McNabbs are out there who, I don't know how he makes the numbers work as somebody who looks at those pro formas all day long. So, I don't know, maybe it's more like 250. But I do feel, when Beth says that number, I'm like, oh, I love it, but it feels aggressive.
Eric?
I think establishing a number is, it establishes a goal. Now we have to make some distinction of what's the expectation of that number, what's the city's response, what is a realistic city responsibility or goal? And on the other flip side, what's the private sector? Because if we establish a number and we keep moving through this process, then there's really nothing that's defined to say, what do we expect out of the private sector to accomplish that? And what are we gonna do to incentivize that private sector to step up to the plate and fill 50% of that 500 or so on and so forth? It might be a distinction, but I think it's just a distinction that we have to establish in this discussion here. To say, how much is the city expected to fulfill this number? And
Tracy and Jen, architect and developer. Do you think if we could remove enough zoning barriers, create enough zoning incentives? Can pace at something more like these 7 units a year or more than that?
So the other 1,000 units aren't new. You have to look at the existing stuff that's already built, that's low hanging fruit. Of course, you're not gonna build 2,000 units every year, brand new construction. But we have, I don't know, 20,000 residents here. How many single family houses do we have? How much square footage of office do we have that's vacant right now? 30% of how many hundreds of thousands of square feet? Currently, we can't repurpose any downtown office space to housing because we have a parking barrier. So it could be a very simple change to a line item in the zoning and very low dollars, and all of a sudden there's 500 units at very little cost. It's the new construction is a whole different ballgame. That takes time, it takes a lot more money.
Takes land.
But the stuff that's already built is a lot easier and a lot faster, and I just want to make sure we don't forget to look at what's already there.
Thank you.
There are definitely challenges to converting, as you know, office to residential like that. I think that's a real hurdle. So putting it in zoning doesn't necessarily make.
I think it would be just to talk on this, yeah, I know, I just wanna say that, if we are interested in having this conversation more, we can put it as an agenda item, and I'd be more than happy to invite Senator Perkins Polka, who's actually working on a bill right now called the Homnibus. And part of that is, tax credits of flipping vacant office space into residential, at that more affordability level. So if this is something, and I just say this because again, sorry so much that we have kind of a tight timeline of things. But if this is something that the committee is interested in hearing more about, I think it would be great for the committee in general to hear from Senator Polka, who was a city councilor who actually established this committee first in, I think, 2016, with the idea of a housing first policy in our zoning. And so I think it would be good if the committee's interested. I would be happy to reach out and invite her to come and speak.
Quickly, when we were doing the zoning changes that are just had first reading at city council, at planning board, we actually had an attorney for an owner come and ask us to take all of the office research that's on Commerce Way behind Market Basket and change that to a gateway, because that is a lot of offices that can only be offices. And then that would be a perfect place to put conversion and have parking. So that's something this committee can make a recommendation.
And there's a lot of undeveloped land, even though you're right, development takes longer. There's a lot of undeveloped land that's only zoned for office right now.
Right.
And nobody's building an office building.
Yes.
Right.
And there's a lot of retail space that
Yes.
is not paying its mortgage.
Right, so.
Oh, sure, I can do it if it works.
So
It has a little string on the right-hand side.
Do we feel that we can find consensus yet on what our proposal of numbers could
Well,
be?
I guess, if I can,
Yeah,
I know we had the stuff with us at the last meeting. I mean, how many units are done a year anyway? I mean,
I would look at, are you talking about affordable or just general use?
it just market.
everything.
Are we talking about permitted or built? Because there's, as we talked about last time, there's what, 1,800 permitted and just a couple hundred built. So I think it's a number that is not, at least to me, a singular level.
But again, in order to look at how many you can do, it has to be a comparison to something.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think we need to compare it to what has been done, because I think the goal of this committee is to look for new and innovative ways to look at things. So if we say potentially went to the developer in Commerce Way and said, we are going to change our zoning tomorrow so that all of that stuff can be made housing, and we're gonna change our parking restrictions, how quick could you flip that into 700 units? So that's hard to say of comparative to the past, because we're looking at inventive ways and creative solutions.
Okay.
Does that make sense? I guess it's just my opinion, so it doesn't have
I
to
mean,
be-
I had the question, basically, it may not be a good
No,
question.
there's no problem.
So I'll withdraw.
If we're gonna start speaking towards having a goal statement. And if we establish a number, I would like there to be some narrative to further define what the number is, because I caution of us pursuing, we need 500 units. What I would like for that goal statement to incorporate is the idea that that 500 is comprised of a varying range of affordable.
Yes, yeah.
So it doesn't need to be specific about 20% is 60%. 20% of the number is just the ability to provide greater housing choices. So that if it's, whether it's 200 or 500, it incorporates a greater range of affordability from state AMI standards of 60 to 100%.
Well, and we're kind of dealing with two issues, not only like in our state, but just across the nation, where there just aren't enough units in general. And then we're also tasked with looking at the affordability component. So I'm wondering too, if our goal could also support a little bit more of what you were saying, Howard, like this much of it is going to be targeted towards affordability, and then this much of it is, market rate, because there are people of all different financial situations wanting to be here. So I think we just have to have it include all of it.
I agree.
I agree with that.
But
I think as long as there's a primary emphasis on affordability, because the market will do what the market does. And it changes, obviously, and it is very expensive to live here. But I think there are market forces to help with that, and I think we're here to be able to push forward on affordability in a way that the market has not been doing.
And I think if you look at it, I can just look at one piece of it. I mean, Pease was designed to provide high-paying jobs. So what does that do? It brings a lot of people into this area who are making substantial amounts of money. And that's driving everything up. So, we kind of exacerbated the situation by doing such a good job at Pease.
Yeah, we're a desirable community.
Yes. How about we support changes, as a committee, we support changes that create up to 500 permitted units of diverse, affordable housing over the next 2 years.
Second.
I think,
yeah, dig it and then
Diverse, affordable. That was the key, the diverse affordability of housing is, I think, the key words that then make it across.
let's hear from Dagan and then from Byron.
And Mary,
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think I would also encourage us to try to create a system that perpetually creates affordable housing and keeps housing affordable.
Yeah, I mean, I think Megan touched on it, and Mary maybe as well, I think. I think it was, and to David's point around the system, I think that. You said here, oh, the market's gonna do what it's gonna do, and we said, it's a desirable community, but the zoning laws create the market. And so it's hard for me to say, well, the market's just gonna do what it's gonna do, and we don't have any part to play in that when we've specifically designed a system that restricts supply. So I think, from my perspective, I think that is a great statement to start, but I think we're setting ourselves up for failure long term. We don't at least try to address the existing market conditions that have created the situation.
I
I think I was next.
give me a little more
Yeah,
on
yeah,
that.
John,
Yeah,
hold on one sec.
No, I mean,
No.
I know,
Mary-
Mary-
Mary's next.
Thank you. And sorry I'm late. There was a wind catastrophe. I was a little windy. I think I really like that statement, and I think if we split out diverse, and talk about the specific income levels. So AMI 60 to 100%, but then also talk about the building type. So not just single family homes, thinking about various different apartment sizes. We're thinking about the lots available for affordable housing. There's many different types that would look like. And then again, I appreciate your point on thinking about how we can fix the system to allow for zoning to create a more middle. Stuff. But at the quality of the systems.
So
Thank you, John.
no, that's fine, I was just asking, elaborate,
Yeah, I just think that,
please.
yeah, so, in the last meeting, you made a comment around, not doing it relative to Shearborn and like I think it was you were in the neighborhood and around like, the sort of. The municipality has it like within their charter to preserve the property values and like hold up the market of like the people in the area. And I guess, I think where there's a fundamental issue is housing is needs-based first. I think that it's an investment in a welfare building opportunity is a secondary overlay. And I think the system we've designed has fully like leaned onto the investment side of this thing. To the point at which, investments, you can buy a house 10 years ago, do absolutely nothing to it and have it double in value over 10 years. And that's what the market's supposed to do. It's supposed to do 10%. Housing overall is supposed to do 3 to 5 or a little bit above inflation. And we're so far away from that. And the reason we're so far away from it is because we keep telling ourselves, well, the city needs to prevent any sort of change in the overall property values of the neighborhoods. And I think, so my push here is, and like this is really, really, I think, critical and important to the overall system here. Because I think we can do short-term stuff, but if we don't look at that long-term, I think we lose.
It's, if I can.
Sure.
We have three more minutes on this.
Let's get 2 or 3 more speakers and see if we can.
You can do one of the 2 or 3.
No, I just say, I think that that's true, but I think one of the things we have to just be cognizant of is we don't want to do that in one specific area and to the detriment of,
I fully agree with that.
okay,
Yeah.
that's fine,
Yeah.
Yeah,
thank you.
it's about a balanced
Yeah.
scale.
Right.
Tracy?
Response to the question on the floor, which is the proposed.
Yes, 500 with the.
I think it's great. I think diverse is a really important word. I would just be careful of the up to, because that means anything from 0 to 500. Maybe you say approximately. I didn't put up to.
I might have said it, but I didn't write it. It's different, disconnect between my
Do we
hand and my
want to
head.
put approximately, or do we want to put a range? So we're setting ourselves a minimum of like, say. I mean, the original goal was 200, so if we say 200 to. An approximate amount of 200 to 500, or do we want to just go with a total approximate? The question just for the,
Can we read it again with where we're at?
yeah, it
Please.
should.
I know, I keep adding to it and changing it, so, let's see. Let's see. Help me out, create changes, we're gonna create changes that support 500 permitted units of diverse affordability of housing for long-term. Another word.
Like Byron, you had a good man, that was really good.
But I-
Sarah, say it again.
Create changes that support 500 permanent units of diverse, affordability of housing for long-term sustainability, long-term.
Yeah, long-term market sustainability, housing market sustainability, I think, yeah.
Maybe if we break that into a second sentence. 500 units permitted, period. These changes would be sustainable over a long.
Permanent units of diverse, affordable housing.
I would say, yeah, that full stop, and then support, support zoning changes that long-term, yeah. That long-term bring us closer to long-term support the missing middle, right?
Or the.
Wordsmithing's failing me right now.
Yeah, I think this is why writers use pens. We don't have to make this permanent at the moment,
No,
right?
no,
We can
How
understand.
about I come up with something and we bring it to the next meeting to finalize the wording, but the 500 could be what we vote
Or
on.
Yeah,
today.
perhaps you could submit the thesis statement to all of us and we can all come with our own version of it to see if we can get
Yeah.
consensus on, I mean.
I'll give it
or
to them
whoever
and
would
they
like-
can send it out.
Yeah, I just.
You know, we can send it out, does that feel good for everyone? We can
Yeah.
send it out, everyone,
Yeah,
if you
I'm fine.
feel that you wanna wordsmith any part of it, we can.
Yeah,
Um,
so
If I can provide the word of caution for those who may not have heard at the beginning of the last meeting, don't reply all.
No,
Don't
yes,
have
yes.
a meeting. in
This
the
is
email.
why I'm not gonna send it, they're gonna send it, you only reply to them.
This is why we need the city lawyer's advice in the meeting.
but I
It
just,
was important.
just before we close on this, what I'm hearing is Dave and you support that. The initial,
Yeah, the
the
number.
general, I support the number, I mean, I would say we should maybe go higher, because in any bargaining, you're always gonna inevitably get whittled down.
Yeah.
So, but
Exceeding goals is great.
I would love to exceed the goal, I don't wanna put a cap on it, and I think 500
big goal.
is.
okay, Jen, I think. Is much more cautious. And
So nothing else, so I'm cautious on
I'm more
this.
cautious,
Hopeful, yet trying to be realistic.
Yes.
Like, I just don't, I think if you aim for the stars, you might fail. I mean, 2,000 sounds amazing too, but like, I don't see knowing how long it's taken me to permit regular multifamily housing in this city. Oh my goodness, it's not easy.
Which brings me up to, a lot of the conversation I'm hearing sounds like we should look at potentially having some conversations with the planning board. Maybe at some point we come together and get a list of recommendations or questions that we'd like to, have, which is something as we did with the land use, we did too. Because
Yeah, and I
again,
think
there is.
having an understanding of what levers we wanna focus on pulling. What levers are there to pull? We've talked about zoning, we've talked about city land, like, what else is on the table?
If the home
Where else
book
is
passes, a lot.
Yeah, and where do we focus, right?
Yeah.
and I think, but if we start with. If we shoot high and aim for the stars, we're not gonna land in the mud, we're gonna shoot for 500, all right? What are the components of that?
Yeah, that's maybe where what I'm trying to get to.
How does that
like,
number
make
break
it a
down?
little
How
more
much from zoning? How much from use of city land? How much from
From-
relieving parking? How
I-
much from, downtown density?
How much from zoning changes, how much from turning land that could not be developed into developable land? Absolutely.
When, I was thinking at one point in time of making a list of the impediments to affordable housing. And then seeing which one of those, some of those levers you can't touch.
Interest rates.
Yeah,
Cost,
you know,
cost.
I mean, cost of materials, stuff like that, we can't control that, but what ones,
Can we?
what impediments do we have an ability to touch?
Well, I think, yes, and making sure, I would like to see a case for some of those come out of this committee to some zoning changes presented to the planning board. I think it's very important to remember that we can present change or ideas or have all these great ideas, but we need to make sure we are making a case with staff help to the planning board to change some of these things. Cause that's one big thing that a lot of the conversations from Portsmouth Listens, people was a lot of conversations of, well, why do we have these parking requirements? Why do we have this requirement? Why can't we do this? Why can't a developer do that? And I know a frustration that I've had, on council and through land use is that we put in a lot of time for a lot of great ideas and then, the planning board doesn't always agree. And so then things get dwindled down. So I think that's really important as we go through this process and we take on that goal is to be more lofty in our goals, understanding that if we give them 1,000 things that we would like to change that help make affordability easier in our community, that we may get 10% of those things.
Got to figure out something.
And then we
I'm just gonna write it neater so they can actually read it.
perfect. Okay, so
I wrote it.
Eric,
No, I didn't know how you were supposed to link this thing to consensus or, you know, anybody's individual perspective. I'll
Yeah.
return to my earlier concern is you just got it as 500. Year, 10 years.
over 2 years,
500 over 2 years.
over 2 years,
So there's a level of distinction that puts us into perspective.
yes.
And I don't know that we could have the conversation or see what the expectation is from the city versus private development. So that we don't go off with 500 and measure ourselves at some particular time to say, well, as a city, we didn't achieve the 500 over 2 years, but what was the expectation from the private sector to contribute to this number? So I think that's it might be a detail, but I think it's a legitimate detail that the other components that you described with the zoning. The variety of levers that you can pull and push.
Do you have a percentage that you have in mind that you would like to?
I don't wanna pull a number out of my hat, and maybe there's some analysis to, you know. To put that number in perspective, because I think it's an important thing in measuring our success in this discussion.
Right, yeah. And I think that's all the work that lies ahead. I think we have to wrap up on this for now, just in the interest of time. We'll take 500 as the aggressive rebuttable presumption.
I would only say that if you're looking for consensus, I would have a problem with that at this particular moment until we have a further discussion of
Well, I would say that
defining that number.
what we're gonna do is send this around so that everyone can make individual tweaks. So if that is a tweak that you or anyone in the community wants to make on theirs, and then when we come back in 2 weeks, we can dive more into setting aside time to just analyze that and maybe we can look for some staff support on providing some data on kind of what has been permitted, what has been built, and maybe even if we have some feedback of plans that have been presented but not approved, that we're looking for some relief.
Yeah,
I think that would be a really
That'd be a
good
good one.
some good information to have. The first thing I think about is the McNabb project that was looking for parking relief that now is can be offices. So maybe getting some of that information for the committee so that we can have some data to, does that sound good?
yeah, that would be great.
Okay,
I mean, I know of a scenario where somebody was trying to kind of get like a spot zoning situation and that was denied. And so I think it's important that we kind of see what our roadblocks are.
yeah, I think so too, to look at some of the things that have been denied over the last few years.
And then also to know what resources we have statewide and federally too.
Yes, perfect.
So if staff could help us with that, when we take up the number again next time, that would be great. And now we're gonna turn to Portsmouth Housing Authority. You've just heard this aggressive goal. What's your capacity to help us meet?
Okay, we're gonna invite you gentlemen to sit right up here, introduce yourselves. Sorry, I think Tom, there's one in the back there. Okay. There we go.
Road crew has the.
These are swivel chairs, we don't have them in every room.
Well, the question, appreciate the opportunity to speak before everybody here. From our perspective.
Yes.
Who are you?
We are
Okay,
from the
John.
Portsmouth Housing Authority. I'm Tom Farini.
Thank you.
And this is
I'm Adam Rudick.
Adam Rudick, and he is the chairman of Portsmouth Housing Limited. I am the chairman of Portsmouth Housing Authority. We both serve on the limited committee, which is the committee that does the tax credit development that you've seen in the city. So they're behind us. we can certainly do 500 in the next 2 years. Portsmouth Housing Authority has taken the opportunity since as this discussion has come forward to look at our capacity, look at our employees, look at what we have. Because we need people who can do development and people who can manage real estate and deal with the people we serve in our properties. And we believe that we can do 500. Do you have a?
I think we've anticipated that number or greater, and so we're ready for that.
And this is, just if I have not made this clear, this is a general conversation. I know that last time, members of the committee said that they were asking some PHA questions, so we invited them, because none of us up here are representatives of PHA. So this is gonna be just a round robin conversation.
Great. So you are saying that you could support constructing 500 units, but I was under the impression that at an earlier time, you guys were not able to do like simultaneous projects. Is that no longer the case?
And I think there was a misunderstanding that was out there. There was a question that was asked about New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority applications for tax credit financing. And there are some issues around simultaneous projects that's very competitive, competing with other communities. So I think there was an answer that answered the question as to NEPA's approach and applications to NEPA. That's not an issue for us. We can launch and shoot down at the same time.
And to give you an idea with the NEPA requirement in any given year, and it's always good when you think about Portsmouth housing or any tax credit housing, that we do a preliminary proposal by the end of June, and then by the end of August, in any given year, we would, for that, we would have to have a fully permitted, not built project in order to get that tax credit financing. So for example, it's not unreasonable if we go to them for financing, if there's a project and that we hope can come forward in the next couple of weeks, we may be able to announce a project that you try to get that one done. But given the discussion in this community, given the discussion in the city at large, to expect that we'd make that kind of a permitting schedule for other properties like Sherburne, rather, it's unlikely, but that doesn't mean we don't have capacity to do it. We do. One other comment on the diversity of housing. I'm really appreciative to hear that the private sector sees a value in doing what the private sector is seeking to do. If I were a city councilor, and I've been one, I would strongly suggest that if you do zoning for private sector to build housing, and we need them to do that, it's a great thing to incent them to do, but you really got to make sure you lock them in for years, and you got to figure out how to do it. And I probably gratuitous.
Note on that, 'cause this question has also come up, that tax credit financed projects like Ruth Griffin Place that we do are permanently important. So I've been asked that question on the streets. They're set, it's part of the arrangements, they don't become market.
Right.
Never.
And since we do have the time, can you just explain to the committee how you get this done? How you were able to have people live in Ruth Griffin Place for, $1,200 a month? Make that work.
That's the whole, so that's why we exist. That's why the Housing Finance Authority exists. That's why the tax credit financing system exists. Because without that very specialized system of providing federal tax credits for local projects, this wouldn't be possible. It would be incredibly difficult. So, and so the way that it works is, well, I don't know how, I mean, it's a very long answer because it's a complicated process, but what makes it work is that federal government allocates tax credits that we can use to finance these projects. The state finance authority allocates those to different projects around the state. So they get a big bunch of them every year, and then various communities have housing authorities that have a project coming down the pipeline. They apply, it's very competitive, there's a very strict schedule of how you apply, and then those tax credits are allocated to the project. And that allows us to build these projects, which are incredibly expensive, and not have to seek market rates in order to make the projects work.
And that margin that we are successful on, that model was designed by the federal government And they expanded that law so that this could be done, and that was done a long time ago because the federal government did not want to be in the business of owning housing. And so the tax credit law was passed a number of years ago, and it allows us to do this. And that's why we get the margin that we get. And, you know, a comment, so that you understand, we're talking about how many houses a year, how many units a year we build. Ruth Griffin Place was a little over 60, took us 6 years. We built 10 a year, I guess, but they didn't come on.
One of the questions that I need to ask is that when the city developed the program, the first time home buyers program, it was established so that it was available to people who lived in Portsmouth and people who worked for the city of Portsmouth. A lot of people, when they're talking about workforce housing or affordable housing, or, you know, talk about the fact that they're concerned because people in Portsmouth are being forced out of the community. As you're probably aware, the first time home buyers program was established at the time that Seacrest Village was sold. And there was a concern that people who were living in Seacrest Village is where Mariners Village is now. Seacrest Village had a lot of low income people living there, and the concern was that when that went away, people would be forced out of the community. So they established the first time home buyers program to allow these, hopefully, make it possible for some of these people to stay in Portsmouth. Under your program, what priority, if you will, for lack of a better term, are given to Portsmouth residents?
There is a preference for Portsmouth residents built into. For
Just
instance,
define, you know, I hope you don't mind, define preference.
well, so I mean, I'll answer as well as I can, because there's a highly technical answer that's part of the application process when you, and so there are a number of features that are considered. And so, you know, if we get too technical, I may have to get back to the answer. But among those features is a preference that moves you up the ladder if you're a Portsmouth resident. You know, again, I'm going to say this a lot. There are federal guidelines for how we orchestrate these projects, and so I'm with you. You know, for me, why I volunteer with the Housing Authority is because of the issue that you brought up. I think that we lose residents, that changes the character of our city. That's super important to me. So I like to push on that as hard as I can. And that's absolutely part of the application process. We can't make it the only part of it.
No, I understand that. And again, we can have more discussions on that, but, you know, I mean, preference maybe 2%, 3% of the. I mean, I'm not asking for it, I'm just making a statement.
I can't give you a number.
Could you
But it's
give
not
us
a-
what
It's not a requirement that you'll need it, because it's federal dollars involved, generally federal dollars.
It's
Um,
that's correct. This is federal law. It applies to all citizens. However, we have been able to, as have other housing authorities, utilize those types of preferences. There is probably within HUD significant differences of opinion. There is in the EPA about how you operate in a federal situation. There are some that say it doesn't matter where you live. And there are others who say a preference makes sense. We operate within the regulations as best we can. And if it's helpful to the committee and we need a full and detailed technical answer to that, we would be happy to provide.
Okay,
Yeah,
I think that would be great.
just to focus us, you've told us that there is not a limit on the number of projects you can do. You have the capacity to do up to 500, and that there's a preference that you could create in the application process for local residents. Let's focus on what the city can do to make that happen. Is how much are you looking at private land? How much are you looking at city-owned land? How much better does it work with city-owned land? How much faster?
We're looking at everything. I mean, you know, there are projects that are in front of our discussion now, but we are always looking at every
available option. And so if you look back at our history, we've done projects that are city-owned land, building behind you here, and we've done projects that are owned by us, like Reese Place. And they have different features. I don't know, trying to think, you asked the question, is one easier than another? I mean, if we own a piece of land, that's very easy. We don't own a lot of vacant land right now. So, I mean, I don't mean to avoid the answer to the question, but we believe that we have to be looking at every possibility in the sun. We are, some are gonna be easier than others, but they're all gonna be, so we don't knock them off.
If I could also follow on to that. But if you were to say, are there certain aspects of doing a project on city land that streamline this? There are. And the reason for that is, it's not land we have to go negotiate for in a different way. And I think it's important for people to understand that were we, for example, able to do something in Sherburne or on some other city property, it would be our expectation that the city would own the land and that we would participate in some form of ground lease, not unlike you see done in Pease on state land. And the reason for that is the city needs that extra control. But it does in some ways streamline the process, but in the end, building a building with environmental site design and all that costs what it costs. And we've done it in both and we hope to continue. Yeah.
Sorry.
Beth
Even-
and then Megan. Well, a little while ago, you talked about how you finance these things, but I think there's been a bit of, because I know I've heard people speak misinformation about how people invest in tax credits and how that works from the investor side. Because I think it's important for people to understand that you don't have investors that have a say in what you do. You're just buying credits that then help them. right?
That's correct.
That's correct.
So
They
I
do not
think
have
we
any
should talk about
policy input whatsoever. It's a one size fits all and they get the tax credit benefit for investing the money and I appreciate you raising that.
And for clarification, are they buying tax credits from the New Hampshire Housing Finance, correct? They're not buying them directly, or can you?
They're allocated from, it starts with federal government through the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority. They're allocated to us to be able to use in the project, and then they go to the tax credit.
Think like federal healthcare funding, those it's not the same. But the concept of it going to a state agency constitute.
Howard? Sorry,
Um,
Megan.
After me.
You had mentioned that you were looking like at all angles. Have you guys done like assessments or looked at all 4 of the city properties that were identified by the land use committee as potential workforce housing sites?
We have actually, when we were asked to, I believe, it's in this publication, when we were asked to look at the Sherburne site of the city originally, I think that we also looked at some other sites, had some comments about those other sites in the publication that we sent to the city. And I mean, you have to understand that we're looking at everything that we can see in the city.
Right.
Because that's our mission. But yes, we have looked at those. Our opinion is that the Sherburne site is by far the most advantageous site in terms of what can be done, the ease of development, the opportunity that's there to get something done in the near future. But there are other great sites that are available. Good point.
I'm gonna go to Howard first, and then I'm gonna give everyone who hasn't had a bite of the apple, and then we'll come around for second bites, and we have roughly 5 more minutes on this topic.
We've gotta take.
Yes, and
Yes,
yes, because we need to go over this letter that everyone received from the mayor. Oh, yes. Howard, yeah, you need someone, Howard and Jen.
Right, so in staying in this conversation right now, I'm just gonna step back briefly to the number we're talking about, 500. And the discussion was permitted units. And with PHA here, I believe it's important they can add to the idea. PHA is not only in the business of creating housing, but they monitor and use vouchers to help support residents in rental situations. So as we are talking about the goal statement, creating units, there also needs to be an awareness for, while PHA creates workforce affordable units that don't sunset, they don't expire, they don't go to market. There are a number of developments in the past that are getting close to sunset. And so we need to have an awareness for not only creating, but protecting what already exists. And PHA can speak a little bit about how they supply, manage, and take care of the vouchers, but they also have an awareness of what units may be coming up and expiring on
Coming
that.
off like.
So
I mean, you hit on a really important issue, which is even if we build a lot really fast, we're gonna be losing affordable housing supply at the same time. It happens faster than we're building right now. We're hyper aware of that. And, you know, we don't have a huge reserve of money to be able to go out and compete in the market for these properties that come on. It's a big problem.
Well, and that's it. We have a certain amount of money that we can use that is not federalized. And we make what we make from the properties that we have, but when you combine that, if we're gonna do, for example, site development costs, it's $500,000. If we have some form of beginning commitment, we take that risk and spend it, but it's not like we're private sector. So, you know, we have to work within our parameters financially. We can't take on ill-advised risk.
Thank you, Tom. Jen?
What's stopping you guys from the 500 units? Maybe it's obvious, but like, what are your big roadblocks?
I don't agree with your question. We're not stopped from doing anything.
But we need,
We're not.
But you're not actively doing 500 units right now, so what do you need?
well, if you look at something like Sherburne,
Yeah,
break it down into 3 phases. Approve the project, design the project, build the project.
well,
We're
almost
at
like
phase 1.
you need to get the ability to do it, right?
We need approval from the city.
Yeah.
We need the council to say, here's a letter authorizing memorandum of understanding
You
saying,
need land.
let's go forward.
You need a place to build, is what.
Is that it? Right?
I mean, as a counselor, when I'm looking at how and why, and this is a constant question I get asked, how and why Sherburne, how and why PHA? To me, we have a site that, whether people agree with my analysis of this, that is sunsetting, right? We have a school that is there that is no longer being used. We have a building that would cost estimated upwards of $10 million to renovate into any type of community space. We have, yes, a softball field that as I said from the day one, I'm committed to relocating, so we don't lose that space for girls in softball. But we have a lot of acreage that could be housing. So to me, it has always been a very simple 1+1 equation. I go back to reading in, I think, May of 21, when community campus was first looking at being purchased, and there was the articles commenting from counselors then about how Sherburne could be turned into affordable housing. And to me, this has been a continuous process. I always say to people, you can have a lot of emotions about my dedication and people's dedication of putting housing there in conjunction with PHA, but you should not have surprise. This has been a continuous conversation for the last 3 to 4 years. So to me, the real thing that they need is land. And it's something that the city has given to them numerous times in the past.
I would just add, you said, well, why aren't you, maybe I don't want to improperly rephrase your question. But as I said earlier, we are hoping within the next 2 weeks to announce another project on city land that we would go to NIFA for tax credits. So we have things that we're doing, and there's one that we're hoping will be teed up quite quickly.
And I hope you didn't take my question as accusatory. It was more like, what are the roadblocks that we can?
It's a great question.
That we can
It's a really good
kind of
question.
push away for you.
It's land.
Okay.
It's a really good question, Jen, that I think that is so simple that so many people don't ask. But it's like, well, why aren't you doing it? Well,
I didn't mean it that way. I meant like, what can we do to help you?
No, I know what you're
What
saying.
are the problems?
completely understand.
There are a
Eric?
couple,
Oh, I'm sorry.
There are a couple of different ways that those roadblocks can fall. One of them is that we can partner with the city. And, you know, there's the idea of giving us land. We're not asking for you to give us land. It's a land lease. We're asking to develop city land for this community. But that's one way that it can work. Another way is that we can find a piece of property that we can buy, like we did with this place. Another is that there's a property owner that wants to work with us. And if there's a developer that's developing a piece of property that wants to involve us, we have expertise in doing the specific thing. Those are some ways that the roadblocks can go.
Okay, just, anyone not have a bite at the apple that wants to? Yep, I said 5 more minutes, 6 minutes ago, so yeah. Yep, so we'll go Byron and Eric.
I hear you, sure, please.
Yeah, I've kept track. Tom, you said Sherman twice, you should Sherman 3 times, and you've indicated Sherman, and it's a great concern. I think to identify the property has caused a considerable amount of controversy within neighborhood, within whatever. I do take note in going on the site that for signature projects, you list Sherman School. You haven't put a shovel in the ground yet. Call it a signature project, I think is premature because you have no arrangement with the city. And you have nothing but discussion with it. I know we're gonna discuss the letter, but while I have the opportunity, the letter that came forward to the city council was very simple in its context. We don't know the size and the dimension of what your intentions are at that property. It's been discussed once, about a year and a piece ago, and there was a tremendous reaction from the local neighborhood. But we don't know where you're standing now with the discussion of returning to that piece of property. Is it, you originally proposed 160 units. That had a reaction. What are you proposing now? What kind of money are you getting ready to solicit the federal government for? Because that money relates to the size of the project.
I'd be happy to
We don't know that.
There's no mystery. We, at this point in time, are seeking an opportunity to have the city council say that they're interested in working with us on the project there. If that were to occur, then we would have to go through the design process and the land use process. That land use process is the opportunity for the public to raise issues about development as they would with any planning board process. And we would gladly hear that. So if you're going to say to me today, how many units? The answer is, we don't know. We're gonna ask the city if the city would like to take this first step, and then we start doing feasibility and talking about it. And then when we get to the point of a land lease, and if we get to the point of actually building it and going through the land use process, that those numbers are gonna, come to public debate and discussion as well they should. But if you're trying to get me to say, we want 200 units, I'm not doing that, okay? And because we know that we have certain financial constraints that drive tax credit housing. And we need to build a certain amount to make it work, okay? And that number has been set as high as 40. So then the question is, well, is there an economy for doing 80? Is there an economy for doing 140? And the answer is, you've heard us, we say we can build 500 units. We're not gonna not say we don't wanna build housing, because we do, and we know why we need it. But at this point in time, there's no relationship with the city that rises to the level of numbers being picked and decided upon by everybody, including the community. Because the community is gonna utilize the public process it should use to help inform all of us.
I appreciate the answer, because it at least describes some clarity question. But I only go further and say that the letter that came from the authority was, can you answer this? Can you respond to this letter by March 22nd? And I don't know why there's such a specific date certain.
These are two different issues, and maybe I can explain it. That might make you a little more comfortable. And I don't blame you. You would look at that and say, is there a fire drill here I didn't know about? Okay.
Well, there's been a
And
lot of time. Yep.
This is a request for community project funding through the office of Chris Pappas. It is a earmark process through the federal government. It is not an application for tax credit housing. It is not a lock-in for any particular thing. This is a different federal process that the communities have used before to get money from the federal government. When you use this process, this merely reserves our rights as a city. to say, and this doesn't even do that, this is just city support saying, hey, we'd like some money from the federal government to maybe build some housing. Thereafter, a considerable amount of process has to occur vis-a-vis the federal government to do that. The process we're talking about here for tax credit financing is not that process. It's one's Coke and what this one's Dr. Pepper maybe. So I don't see, I can see how it would raise concern, but there is no, this really reserves our rights with the federal government to further apply and maybe not get this, this that we're talking about requesting. That is on parallel track with everything else we're doing and not part of a particular, for example, Sherman-driven process. It's its own
Well,
thing.
the letter that was sent to the city council was specifically
Right.
mentioning the Sherman site.
And as I understand it, when you submit a letter, you can say there's interest, support in the community, that kind of thing. It does not mean, this does not bind the city to do anything, as far as I can tell. It says, yeah, we'd like to build some and we'd like to maybe build it here. But it is not the same financial process as tax credit.
Thomas, can I just really quickly, just for clarification for the public and the committee, what was just discussed was everyone received this letter, and if you followed the city council, the PHA has asked for the city council to send a letter of support to Congressman Pappas for, as Tom just talked about, a different wave of federal money through federal programs. So the mayor and the city council voted that a letter would be presented to this committee for, and this is a quick turnaround, but for a letter of support for this, on the city's behalf to send, again, to supporting PHA for federal dollars for project earmarked under the idea of a Sherburne school, but in general, looking for federal money. So, we're gonna, yes.
I just had one quick, as Tom said, this is not a binding thing.
Correct.
This is an opportunity that we discovered as we were getting ready to look at this project. And we also discovered there was a deadline to get this information in. So if there's a project at Sherburne, perhaps we can get some extra federal financing to do it, which would be great. If there's not a project at Sherburne, then.
And I think it's important to know, as was clarified at the city council meeting the other day, that this federal program, the city reaches out, uses to get federal money for the city too. So this is not this is a well-known federal program that communities use all the time to try to draw from the well from.
Right, John.
Just one,
Can I ask
one question, John.
Does this letter have to be site specific? Our understanding was that it does.
Yes, and
Okay.
the mayor has written it, site.
Well, that's why I asked the
Yes,
question.
yes.
I mean, it's.
Yes.
It's an appropriate question
No,
to ask.
absolutely. I asked it at city council the other day. Absolutely.
So I think your co-chairs would be looking for a motion to,
Hold on, he didn't.
Yes.
I just, I'm
Yes,
sorry, I know it's time, the question I have was just sort of like a callback to the original assumption around the housing needs. We quoted 1,500 based on the PHA is sitting right here, so I just want to double check the 1,500 over 10 years, and that's what you're saying is the actual.
It's actually, I think, 1,500 by the end of the decade.
Yes.
Okay, by the end of the decade.
Somebody once said about doing something by the end of the decade, and we don't do these things because they're easy, but because they are.
So really 7 years.
Yes. Yes.
Should we bump our 500?
You can bump yours and submit it back at the next one. Yes, Megan?
Really quickly, just because, this ask is looking at Sherburne and there's been a lot of dialogue about Sherburne. You mentioned a dollar figure of 10 million. I think I've heard Mayor McCackard say $8 million. Like, when you're thinking about the Sherburne property, is the school actually part of your plan?
Yes.
To have the ability to, like, if that's what the community wanted,
Yeah,
to
and
keep it.
I should back, it's very important for us at this point in the project. Order of operations they get so complicated that order of operations is really important. So we don't wanna, I wanna answer your question without getting to a place we're gonna be down the road. But are we looking at including the school? We're definitely.
Does that mean that we are committing to absolutely use the school? The answer is that is now unclear,
That's not.
but we need to do the work to get to the.
Right, okay,
We're gonna look,
okay, cause I guess I'm just trying to figure out like, if it's 8 million or $10 million to rehab something. I guess trying to connect how you get there and why you also wouldn't be able to purchase like property for that same amount and accomplish the same goal.
well, then you have to purchase the property and build the project, so it's just more expensive.
Right, but I'm just saying like focused specifically on the 17,000 square foot building. I'm being told it's $8 to $10 million
I wanna clarify, we're talking about when the city had looked at rehabbing that building for purposes of community space or redoing this building for school. Those were the numbers that were coming up, which is, you know, one of the initiating points of moving Lister Academy out. So that number doesn't necessarily mean what it would mean to them to rehab it. I don't know what that would be. We as a city have not run those numbers of what that would be to turn that into housing and all of that. The number that, you know, we have talked about, Mayor Cameron and myself, was the number to rehab it and keep it a school. We're not, so I just wanna make that a
And
clear.
if I may, Assistant Mayor, thank you for that, you know, which is why, for example, if we had some form of memorandum of understanding with the council to take first steps, we then feel empowered to spend that limited amount of money that we have. So we're gonna be talking about figuring out what it would take, and we're gonna have to spend probably $500,000, maybe 600 to do that. You can't come up with that number by osmosis. And even to be fair, that number that the council was looking at was a little while back.
Yeah.
So it might be more expensive. We don't know till we do the work.
So we have this letter in front of us. And we've been asked by the council to make a decision on it. So I would look for a motion to approve the letter.
Well, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I guess I watched the council meeting and I was under the impression that we were gonna get a copy of this letter. But we also were going to have a deeper understanding and maybe even see what was part of the application, like what is this supplementing?
It's supplementing nothing at this time. It merely reserves our rights in an application process that is somewhat extensive, as I understand.
Okay, so,
Consequently, if you don't tell them by date such and such, simple correspondence, you do not then have the right to apply. You haven't reserved your right to apply. So as I understand it, and I will admit that I do not have perfect and detailed understanding. I know enough about federal process to know that it's a detailed application. Commits us to nothing unless we start asking for it. So if a community has had to put it, decided, no, it's not gonna happen at Sherburne, then we don't proceed. So the answer is, I do not know what the application process is, other than that it is, I understand, to be a fairly complex one. And all this is sort of like the starting gun, you get to preserve your rights and maybe not exercise them.
okay, and then I guess thinking about like the city as a whole too, and city manager, it might lean on you a little bit. How would us supplementing, you know, the PHA impact like the weight of this known city needs that we have? You cited like something to do with policing and something to do with Mechanic Street. So I wanna make sure that obviously like we're focused on how we're here, but we're also correct. Because those are huge issues as well, impacting our current community members.
Right, as I understand it, the congressman has the ability to take in from his district as many opportunities from as many eligible entities. Municipalities are one of the eligible entities. And I believe he has at the final analysis has as many as 15 to support from his district. So I think he's looking for a diversity of requests from different committees in Congress. And the other two requests, the two requests that are coming from the city to be submitted either today or tomorrow, one for the police department and one for the Mechanic Street pump station. So different buckets of money, different entity applying, so.
And there are other nonprofit and entities within our city who are applying for this.
Correct. I can tell you that.
Yes, and that have.
I can tell you that I
It's not our
signed 3
it's not our
support
land.
letters.
No, but I will say that the city is sending 3 letters of support for other
Right, I
nonprofits.
can tell you about Crossroads House and Great Bay Community College and Gather.
Sure.
And they were looking for city support, which we were glad to give, because we don't feel that they're taking away from our ask.
And so I think I would say it's safe, would you say it's safe that staff has the opinion that this ask is not taking away from our asks?
We don't think that it does, but again, I wouldn't want to speak for the congressman.
Yes.
Does that answer your question?
It does. I guess I just wanna make sure like that we are following due process, and I just am concerned about the perception of the housing committee here that's been tasked with trying to come up with recommendations, to just not be given the opportunity to really like, we don't even have like a plan. Like I thought we were going to talk about Sherburne, like that's one of our top action items.
It's a land lease. It's to discuss the land lease for Sherburne.
We're not gonna figure out how many units, what buildings will be used. We're gonna, our mission is to review and recommend to the council ways in which the city can create affordable housing. One of those ways may be to use the Sherburne property for workforce housing.
Sure,
And that's.
sure, and I
that's-
understand that.
We don't have to get overly complicated.
I will say just based on time, Eric, I'll have one more bite of the apple and then.
I make a motion, I would make a motion, I believe the body in the letter appropriately describes the need that we are applying for.
Okay,
The only thing that makes this problematic with me is to be site specific, because we haven't had, we as a council have not had that discussion, we as a body have not had that discussion. We don't know the size, scope, or dimension of any of the, as it was described, as the school workforce housing project. So I would, my motion would be to accept the letter, submit the letter, exclude Sherburne School as any component of all that.
Second.
okay, quick discussion, or do we have any?
Can we do that?
Yeah, I thought that we had to.
I mean,
Would that sabotage the project?
I think we were
Intended for
told
sure.
that we could-
So then what we should do, Beth, before you walk out real quick, we'll call a vote for that. And then if there's another motion on the floor, we can call a vote for that.
Just a quick discussion on it. We just heard that if the letter should be site specific in its recommendation.
then if you-
If we take out the site, we're essentially hamstringing
Yes,
the
so
request.
so what I would say is that we have a motion on the floor with a first and a second, so we will call the vote for that. If that fails, we can call another vote. Someone can make a motion and make a second. We'll do it all in favor.
Aye.
All in favor of removing this site?
Correct, all in favor of Eric's motion, which would require the removal of the site. All in favor? We have 3 nays. Nay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 nays. Noes have it. And then I would look for a
Make
motion.
to approve the letter as written.
Second? We have a second, sorry.
Second.
Okay, I would say all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Opposed.
3 opposed, 8 have it, okay, the ayes have it, so we will let the mayor know that the committee has voted in favor of this recommendation. PJ, thank you, PJ. Tom and Adam, thank you very much for that. I'm sure we will see you back in this committee. We will go quickly to the Housing Navigator update.
Thank you.
Howard,
All right.
thank you. Thank you for the public for your patience. I know I said we we're gonna keep it quick, but this is a hot topic, an important topic, and one, as we know, we will be talking a lot about.
We have to get time for questions.
Yes.
So, actions since the last meeting have been, if you go to the planning sustainability portion of the city's website, in the blue bar across the top, there's now a section for housing. And so what we're starting to do is we're starting to migrate all the housing information over to a more central location that's easily accessible. It's just the start. We have, as part of the grant that I oversee, we have engaged an economic and development entity called RKG. And RKG will be here on April 4th to discuss the market analysis that they have done. They are the same entity that performed the housing analysis 2 years ago for PHA. But they specialize in development and market trends and things like that. You had spoken about what are the levers that we can pull. They did an analysis as required by the grant having to do with regulatory aspects of the city and what changes can occur. One of the levers is regulatory changes. We're all been talking about zoning. They will be here to present their findings in different changes that occur with regulatory aspects with the city to help better incentivize development to include and at what scale and what values affordable housing. So they'll be here to present that. Farther out, not over the distant horizon, but still in view, when it can get scheduled is my bringing forward to the housing committee aspects of the final report that comes out from the Places to Live dialogue that occurred. And next step after that will be an ADU. So stay tuned.
Oh, thank you, Howard. And next we have committee members' questions.
Let's get a show of hands of how many would like to speak on this, just so we know.
I don't.
Do you do you wanna roll this over to the next meeting? Are you okay with that, or?
Well, I mean, you wanna have public comment and we're at the end of our normal time anyway, so I think it's,
You okay, are you okay with moving this to the first item of the next meeting?
I think that it's the appropriate way to handle it.
Perfect, thank you for that, John. Okay, so now we are going to start with the public comment. Please keep a few minutes in your heart. Just sit right here and start with your name and where you live. Portsmouth residents first.
So good evening, Rick Beckstead, 1395 Islington Street. Thank you for having public comment and keeping it somewhat non-limited because this is really important to everybody and your thoughts are important, but when it comes to these type of committees tend to not be on a time frame as much. So I really appreciate it. So in simple fact, I have to go on the record to set the record straight. I had the assistant mayor and I had the mayor on Monday night actually go and say that the previous council, reason why we bought community campus was to turn Sherburne School into affordable housing is incorrect. So what the correct statement should be is we bought community campus because it gave the community opportunities that we never had. Number one, foremost, over 300 children are at that daycare. The developer that was in negotiations to purchase that was going to close it. That's 300 families. So I know we have hunger issues, we have housing issues. Try and go and do daycare. That, I mean, it's huge and we saved it. And if they put into the community, they are renters, they provide with us, so it's not all the taxpayers that are paying for this building. It gave us opportunities that we didn't have. The 4 acres up front are developable, it's dry, no wetlands, no anything, unless something has changed since again, 2 years ago, I've been out of office. I still think it's kind of funny that my name gets brought up from time to time, but nevertheless, so that was the intent. It was nothing with Sherburne. If you had asked me then about Sherburne, you know, as far as the Lister Academy going, made sense. But the previous council, the one that had enacted this whole thing, did not want to give any preconceived notions. My idea would have been is I would have had community meetings, community support. What was the community's idea? Not necessarily what the city's ideas were that. So I want to correct that. Now, as far as anything else, some of the things that are really confusing is you have 500 over 2 years. What if I told you you could do 1,000 2 years? You don't have to build a thing, not one thing. I've been preaching this for almost 12 years. The existing units, and I have one, Mary was actually on my Portsmouth listens, and a lot of people, tax exemptions we do for the elderly, tax exemptions we do for our veterans. You do that very thing. There are tons. I mean, half of what we have as far as the stock, half is ownership and half is rental. So it's 10,000 units, you got 5,000 rentals, and my numbers may way be off. But if you could go and establish a third of that, you give them an exemption. Those people want people to stay in Portsmouth. I know people that have been here all their lives that own 2, 3, 4 houses. And they rent them to affordability. How about a 2-bedroom, 2-bath for $1,400 a month? This family does this for 3 of their units. Now, because our budgets and our taxes, they go up, everything else has to go up, our water, our sewer and stuff like that. But if we have these tax exemptions, now, that does not forego, I mean, when Mayor Farini was talking about exemptions, how we do things at the federal level, we have to go and negotiate with the state of New Hampshire. Because we can go and forego our taxes, but the state of New Hampshire's taxes, we still have to pay for with those exemptions. So we need to work on that. Now, when I was mayor, I worked with 12 other communities where we got the most bang for the buck was when all the mayors, and there's only 13 of them in the state of New Hampshire, spoke together. We unified. This is a serious problem around the entire state. You get those other 12 mayors with our mayor, and you sit them down and you bang on legislation and you bang on their door every single time that you can. We met monthly during the pandemic. We went and took something and we made it something. These are the recommendations, and I guess I'll leave it to that for now, but I mean, I did not know about this committee. I did not know those applications. I'm a building contractor. I understand the cost of things. I've done development type projects, investment projects and stuff like that. I would volunteer my services so that I can have more than, and I appreciate more than 3 minutes, but I would love to be a part of this group so that I could give a little bit more history itself. Thank you, John, for the 4-minute mark. Have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick.
Next,
Hi, Peter Huda, 280 South Street. So I have the letter and I have the reports that were prepared by Portsmouth Housing. So I want clarification, I think just like Megan did, on the difference between affordable and workforce. These are not interchangeable. It's in the letter, workforce housing. This is a big buzzword now for people to get more housing here. It's in here. Portsmouth Housing, workforce. This is a big difference in the amount of income people can have and the amount they pay. So I would like clarification for the rest of us who are looking at this to say, which one are we really going for? These terms are not interchangeable. Affordable is a lot higher. Also, there is state of New Hampshire, RSAs, they govern what is workforce, what can be called workforce. What is down at Ruth Griffin now is being called workforce in the reports that Howard had prepared. It wasn't workforce when it went in. Is it workforce? We don't know. That's what you're using here. That's what I would like clarification on. The next thing I'd like to talk to you about is the process that Tom had described. Basically, there is an RSA for that, and it's section 4114, and it tells you if the city council, which you can do, goes through an acquisition of land or buildings or demolition or moving anything, you have to go through the land use process. And from the perspective of a resident sitting here today, none of this has been done. You specifically stated that more than correctly on Monday night. We have no signed contract, we have nothing, but you're stating in your letter, again, that you're using Sherburne. I thought it was kind of interesting also that before you even heard the public speak, you voted, done, fine. The next thing, you have to go through all the land use boards and you have to have 2 public hearings on this and give everybody a chance to understand what is gonna be built. I know Tom said they don't know yet, but everything is going towards Sherburne. And the work that has been done so far, it is not even half of it that could have been done. Got it, John? Thank you.
thank you, Peter. Next, yes, please.
I'm John Logan. I spoke to you very briefly after your last meeting. And I congratulated people for their willingness to work on this issue. And I voted, I'm a citizen of the of Portsmouth. I voted for a city council that promised to make a high priority for affordable workforce housing. And I think the step you took tonight, just talking about a 500 unit goal, rhetorically, I think that's very nice. It'll make a good headline. It's in the right direction. It sounds aggressive. I don't know if it's understating or overstating what can be done. So I really can't comment on that. But what I can comment on, and I'd like to add to the questions that other people have raised about what kind of housing do we need here in Portsmouth? Who needs housing? Who's got a problem that the city should address? And everybody has a housing affordability problem. You might say, I do. I don't really have a housing affordability problem. I make way over the median income, but I'm paying a lot in taxes. You know, this is an affordability problem. My utilities are going up. And this is I've got an affordability problem. That is not the affordability problem that we need to deal with here in Portsmouth, and certainly not the one that I voted for the city council to deal with. If we solve the affordability problem for everybody in the city who makes more than $110,000 a year, then I would say we have failed, totally failed to deal with the actual real issue. And as you discuss this back and forth and a workforce, affordable median income stuff, and until you get down to the point of saying, we need some really low income people have a housing need and we need to deal with it. We've got some moderate income families with a real housing problem and we got to deal with it. And okay, up to the median income, I'm okay with that. But when we start worrying about people who, well, you know, prices are getting high and taxes are high and, you know, it's not comfortable to spend city resources on poor people. What about us people, the real Portsmouth people? There's that kind of a rhetoric in there. I hear the undercurrent of that rhetoric, and it makes me very, very insecure about what the future of this initiative is going to be. It could go forward aggressively, or it could be undercut bit by bit by bit by bit to the point that it's not any longer recognizable as dealing with the true affordability problem of the people who really, really have needs for housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Next. Come on in, Esther.
Good evening, Esther Kennedy, 41 Pickering Ave. And I really was coming here tonight to kind of listen to see what your goals were gonna be. And I was hoping the committee would start setting them. I have been taking back the number of affordable units, actually low income to affordable, that have been taken off the books because they have aged out. And when I met with my Portsmouth Listens group, they did not understand that. But hundreds of units have been taken off the book because we put an age span of 30 years on them. In particular in the last 5 years, because most of it was put on in the 90s when we were having hardships around here and the base was closing down. So I was hoping to hear you all talk about how we're gonna have longevity. You know, you just passed something without any public comment, and that's your choice. But, you know, did anyone ask them what their longevity is gonna be? How long is this? Is this for life? Or is it for 30 years? I don't think we know. So I was hoping that this committee would start talking about, and as previous speakers spoke, about what the logistics look like for housing in Portsmouth. And have a really strong discussion on that. What is this committee gonna do to support the fact that other communities have said, no, we're not gonna increase our housing. Both Newington and Greenland have publicly said that. So what are we gonna do to work with communities that might have said, yes, we're willing to look at it? I was also hoping this committee would start looking at what Dover's doing, what Rochester's doing, what Farmington is doing. They just got a huge development up there for the first time. As someone that owns property, and I can tell you their newsletter was very informative about it. And I have not received anything about affordability or workforce, or however we want to describe it here in Portsmouth. So I was hoping the community, this committee, instead of ramming something through for Sherburne and giving away something without really justifying how it affects the Portsmouth taxpayer. And as you mentioned, Assistant Mayor, the ball fields and other things, and knowing that other nonprofits have been interested in that building. They all showed up when there was 400 people. They were talking about that and how they had interest in the Sherburne School, and we just kind of put them by the wayside. I was hoping this committee would have a strong discussion about what you see. You're all from all different parts. I had a nice thing of working with Megan on my Portsmouth Listens. I know Eric, I know all of you for the most part, and I worked with all of you in some capacity, but really have a conversation and put guidelines down on what we need and what they are, and what your expectations are, so we can judge them as a community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker? Oh, wait, hold on a minute. Okay.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I'm fine.
I have a more comfortable chair. Maybe next time we can have a meeting somewhere where everyone could be sitting. around.
Unfortunately, 5:30 Thursdays, that room is
That's
already booked up, and then we have planning board.
Page Trace 2017 Cox Street. I'm speaking as an individual tonight. But how many of you here can say that you oversee 9 units in the city that all have parking, that are all priced under $1,700 a month with parking? No one. I oversee those 9 apartments. It's part of my duties, and I get nothing for doing it other than the enjoyment of seeing that there are people that can actually live in units that they can afford. And you all sit around here and you talk to the Portsmouth Housing Authority, but do you ask the hard questions? How many of you understand that with federal funds, the list of people that can sign up to utilize whatever they build is a national list? It has to be. So we can have somebody from Arizona apply for our affordable housing that we build. Now, I think that PHA is a good thing for Portsmouth. I wish we would just stop doing things like we did tonight, where you didn't even have the courtesy to listen to the public before you voted. Shame on you all. But I am just a resident now. I am no longer a counselor. I will once again also stand up for Mayor Beckstead, past Mayor Beckstead. As a council, we never, ever discussed the issue of Sherburne as it related to community campus. So I wish that you all would stop saying that the council, the previous council before you brought that up, because that's incorrect. So if you're going to talk about Sherburne, let's ask the people that live around Sherburne what they think, what they honestly think. Include them in the process. You certainly have enough non-publics, and you can share information willy-nilly, however you want to. You seem to all do it. So let's include the people that really matter. And let's look at who's going to get that housing. Because you suddenly will be obligated to look at anyone who applies, not just the people of Portsmouth. And I suppose that's right if you accept federal funds. But be transparent. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Okay.
You, Manny.
All right, thanks, John. Manny Garganza, 471 Colonial Drive. Let me start this way. Something is gonna go in the church. You know, if anybody thinks it's not, they're out of there. Love to have a living mind. The thing is, the density of the project is gonna go on there. I had also went on the Portsmouth Housing website. And I found a traffic study. And the traffic study said they based it on 111 units. Now, 111 units is quite a bit of density to me. You're not gonna put it in one building. So you're gonna have to spread that building out. I know they have to have something to start with. It was interesting on traffic volumes, and it was done, that study was done in April of 2023, which is pretty recent. And I think the study said the traffic in there would be like 9 additional trips in the morning and 42 additional trips in the day at certain times. I don't know if you've ever sat out at 33 in Sherman Road by the lights at 8 o'clock in the morning. They're still coming off exit 3. They may not all be going to Sherman, but there's an awful lot of traffic there. I was surprised when I went on the website to see Sherman School as and Eric brought this up, as a line item. I said, I know we haven't talked anything about that in the meetings, because I follow it pretty close. I'm just wondering, you know, and I know they gotta put something down. I just wish that we are a little careful what we do. 500 units in 2 years. I sat through all the land use boards. I don't think we got enough land to do all that. But you have, there was a total of 195 pieces of property that the city owns. They brought it down to 11, then they brought it down to 4 or 5, and one of them sits out here that they want to put a police station on. One was the school over here by Little Harbor, the ball field. Well, heaven forbid, ball field is sacred territory in the city. But, you know, we just gotta go slow. Something's gonna go there. Just be careful what we put there. That's still a neighborhood. That's the last pure neighborhood in the city.
And Maple Haven would disagree.
Well, trust me, nobody knew we were there for a lot of years.
Coakley.
Yeah, there were a lot of people, yeah, Coakley's small, but a lot of people never knew Panaway was out there. But just be careful on what we decide on. And, you know, I know they have to have a placeholder for their money and stuff. We want to use our common sense when we do something. That's all I'm asking. Thank you.
Thank you, Manny. Next speaker? Any more speakers? One last call for speakers? Okay, thank you all so much for the
We
public.
adjourn.
Oh, John, we're not up here anymore.
I made a motion. I can make a motion.
Yeah, oh, you made a motion to adjourn.
Let's let the assistant mayor finish.
I was just thanking everyone. Again, we do have some homework. We'll make sure to send out Beth's goal statement to everyone, so everyone can speak their own personal opinions. We'll discuss it. There is a reality that this might end up being an hour and 45-minute meetings, there's more closer to 2 hours. And so our next meeting is in 2 Thursdays, so we'll send out the agenda. If there's anything you want on the agenda, please send it over. Yes.
I was not on the distribution list, John did.
I will make sure we add it to that. I'm sorry about that mishap. Yes,
One
Byron?
Maybe I should send it to you guys.
Yes.
If the how Tom's doing like word email, that way like right now, it's just like have that one.
Yes, so is it going to your personal email right now? I'll update that. I'll update Peter on that. Everyone else is getting them? Okay. Any other questions, comments? Thank you guys all so much. Thank you for the public. Meeting adjourned. Or, yeah, meeting adjourned.